Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on marijuana legalization. In this discussion, we'll be hearing from people who support legalization, as well as those who oppose it. Enter any questions that you might have using the question and answer function, and as time permits, we will get to them. Tonight's moderator for this discussion is the most awesome Steve Marchand. Steve is well known in the activist and political circles of New Hampshire. He served as the mayor of Portsmouth from 2006 to 2008. Steve is currently the principal of SRM Consulting, which is a public affairs and strategic communications firm. And prior to that, he served as the director of corporate relations for the University of New Hampshire. If you want to know pretty much anything about what's going on in New Hampshire, Steve is the one to ask. We are very fortunate to have him here with us tonight to moderate this important discussion on this day, April 20th, 420. And now I'll turn over the discussion reins to Steve. Steve, it's all yours.
Oh, Wendy, that was very kind. Thank you very much. And yes, it was not lost upon me that today is April 20th. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but we are all among friends. And I think that tonight's discussion will be a good example where even though we're not all maybe on the exact same page on this particular issue, I know that we're all in it for the best interest in New Hampshire and are all really deeply engaged in public policy writ large. So this is a great group to be associated with, and I hope folks get as much out of it as I believe they will. So without any further ado, let me introduce the folks that will be doing the preponderance of the discussion tonight. We have three state representatives, all wonderful people. And we have Kate Frey, who is wonderful and longtime active, well-known in the Concord community. Kate Frey is the Vice President of Advocacy for New Futures. We have as a pair of pro-legalization state representatives, both Democrats, State Representative Tim Egan from up north of the Notches in Sugar Hill, beautiful Sugar Hill, there's Tim. And then from awesome Nashua, an awesome state representative from there, State Representative Manny Espitia. Manny, awesome to see you as well. We have one of my favorite members of the legislature, and I mean that not just because she's on this call, on this event, Sue Mullen, state representative from Bedford. She will be representing the position of opposition to legalization. And like I said, all of us here are friends, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So basically, the way the format will work is each of our four primary speakers tonight will have the opportunity to make their remarks, their case for up to 10 minutes, though they're not required to. After that, I may inject questions here and there, but by and large, we'll get through it. And then there'll be some real opportunity to get some Q&A going and have a lively conversation. Again, get your questions in there, and as time allows, we'll try to inject some of those along the way as well. And then we'll go from there on this issue that has been hot and heavy in the legislature, certainly this year, but really over the last several years. So with no further ado, let me begin with Kate. Kate Frey, again, will provide new futures principles for cannabis commercialization policy and regulation. And few would know this better than Kate. We really appreciate you being here tonight. Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody. So nice to see my fellow panelists, and I can't really see everybody else, but I'm glad you're out there. I just usually like to start with just laying the landscape of cannabis policy. When we talk about legalization, sometimes people are on using different terms or different planes, so it just helps to kind of level set. So you can see this lovely map of United States. A lot of this information is from a very helpful article in Health Affairs. The link is there. And as Steve said, you know, cannabis policy has really evolved over the years. So in the different stages of what's on the flyer here, and then also on the map, you know, in the past, a lot of people throw around the word prohibition, you know, and if you're opposed, you're a prohibitionist. But in actuality, very few states have prohibition on the books. There's a lot more, there's a lot of policies now that involve decriminalization, medical cannabis, and then a lot of some states have followed with recreational cannabis. So when you say prohibition, there's really only 2 states that ban it altogether, but several states have moved in the direction of allowing some form of cannabis use. Decriminalization is kind of that next step. It's the repeal of criminal penalties associated with cannabis possession for personal use or casual exchange, but not sales. And then there's medical cannabis legalization. We have that here in the state, therapeutic cannabis. It allows patients to be certified with certain qualifying conditions so they can purchase cannabis at dispensaries that are operated within the state. And then lastly, you have what's called recreational cannabis legalization, adult use. Different terms have been used, but this really means that it removes the criminal and civil penalties associated with the possession. And all models right now in the United States is 21 and older. New Hampshire has decriminalized and has therapeutic cannabis, but as most of you likely know, we don't have recreational cannabis. It's important to point out there are 2 main models. There's a non-commercial model that doesn't allow the commercial production or retail sales, but only small amounts of cannabis for personal use. And then there's a commercial model, and that means all aspects of the market is legal. So you have a robust commercial model just with a industry that produces, supplies, and you have retail sales. For what I'm going to talk about tonight at New Futures, we've really looked, we're most concerned about a commercial model because that's where you have the biggest public health implications. When you're talking about a non-commercial model, it does address, I think, some of the social equity issues, but it does not create a full commercialized model like we've seen with alcohol. So that's really the context of what I'm going to say tonight. I'm going to stop sharing this one and then share another one. Okay, so this next document I'm going to share is New Futures Principles for Cannabis Policy and Regulation. And so over the last few months, when we really started to have this discussion again, because we knew it was coming up in the legislature, we did a thorough review of states that have commercialized to really get a better understanding of what is effective policy, what would be the safer form of regulation. You know, when states began to commercialize now, wow, about 10 years ago, it was literally the Wild West for some states in the West. The industry was really driving those conversations. So there wasn't a lot of public health implication or what public health policies that were in the laws. So recently, we've seen much more laws and policies developed with public health and population health at mind. So those are the ones that we've really looked at. And what we are, our policy, what we're saying is if you want to move in the direction of having a commercialized recreational marijuana sales in New Hampshire, you have to have at least 4 of these 4 principles in place in order for it to be optimal and safe, and so we can protect our kids, guard against problematic use, advance social justice and equity in the state, and reduce harms. So the first principle is really important and very clear, protect children and youth. And so the subpoints under that is limiting the potency of THC in products. Most recently, some states have taken the effort to have a limited amounts of potency. That's our biggest concern because very early on in the commercializing, we were seeing still seeing very high potency in these products. If we're going to regulate like alcohol, then why wouldn't we have limits just like we do with alcohol? We would want to prohibit packaging and products that would be attracted to kids and have buffer zones for retail outlets. Principle number 2 is a really important one too. And actually, there really hasn't been much policy around this in the bills that have been introduced is really promoting social justice opportunities and equity. It's not just once you legalize, yes, you don't have to worry about the criminal issues, but let's face it, those states that have commercialized, it's an industry really very much directed by white men. So what are we going to do to change that? What kind of licensing opportunities are we going to have? What kind of grants will we have available for those neighborhoods and communities that have been affected on the war of on drugs? Protecting public health and population health is our third principle. Making sure that public health is at the table, requiring health warnings, informing vulnerable groups of impacts, and having the same kind of smoke-free restrictions that you would have with smoking and vaping. And then lastly, our principle where we've really learned in the past that it doesn't work well is ensuring appropriate funding from revenue directed to efforts to reduce harms. We know this firsthand from the Alcohol Fund. We've had a law in the book since 2003. 5% of revenues are supposed to go to prevention, treatment, and recovery, and that's never happened. So if we are really going to legalize and commercialize another addictive product, we have to be absolutely certain that the money is going to be used to minimize harms. So those are our principles. They're pretty straightforward, and I think they make a lot of common sense. They have not been included in any legislation that we've seen here in New Hampshire. The latest bill 1598, this gives you kind of a side-by-side of what is in and what is out of the bill. And as you can see, there's a lot of reds, which means it's not in the bill at all. Social justice and equity, there's no principles whatsoever in that. When I asked the sponsors of the bill, why not? They said, it's just too hard to do. And I just think we can do better than that. And then as this bill kind of went along, these colors kind of got more red. So for example, in 1598, the first version of it had $25 million going to prevention, treatment, and recovery. By the time it was amended in the House, it was laughable how little was going to substance use disorder. So that's why now that indicator, for example, is red. So that's just an overview of our principles. And I hope as we advance this discussion, we can be very inclusive of other people's opinions around this. And instead of kind of the knee-jerk, oh, you're a prohibitionist, you don't want it in our state. I think what we're trying to say here is if we're doing it, let's get it right from the start, instead of some of the states who are now trying to backpedal into more appropriate public health policies.
Okay, Kate, thank you very much. What a wonderful way to start this evening. With a lot of facts and baseline values that I think we can use throughout the remainder of the program. Let me turn now to one of our three state representatives on the panel. I mentioned, introduced him before, Tim Egan. There's Tim, who I think has just arrived home, or at least close by, from beautiful Sugar Hill up in northern Grafton County. Tim has been very active on some pro-legalization legislation in this session, and certainly knows more than most on the topic. So Tim, with that, take it away.
Well, thank you. And my apologies as I sort of just walk into my front door here. I'll enjoy the lovely I'll share you the lovely outdoors of Sugar Hill while I talk. Thank you all for having me. And I want to start with that. I am a fan of what New Futures and Kate talked about. Their principles are essential. I think if we're going to ever enter into developing a policy around cannabis, there has to be some guidelines. There always should be. And, I wish there were more guidelines in pharmacology. I wish there were more guidelines in alcohol, but I think New Futures is doing the right thing, which is they're trying to say, let's look at the big picture here and what we're going to offer to our constituents, to our fellow residents of the state. I have been a big proponent of cannabis, and I think it's really for three reasons. I think society has changed over time. We've come to this point where we have seen what can and can't happen with cannabis. On the canned side, I think we've realized that it is not an addictive property. I think on the can side, we have seen that it can be a substitute for addictive properties like opioids. Folks down at Partners Healthcare are using cannabis in pain relief treatments. I think what we can also see is that it can be, for some folks, an alternative if they're looking for anxiety, stress relief from other types of medical traditional prescriptions. So I think we're realizing that society, our sort of medical community. I think also we have matured as a society. It's no longer the evil weed, the films of the 20s and 30s where the people are going crazy because they smoked some cannabis. I think what we're realizing now is that we've lived through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s generations of young folks, and those folks aging, that they're able to utilize cannabis as a normal way that someone would have a glass of wine, someone would have a beer. And I think the third thing is that we realized is that whether we like it or not all the time, we are a capitalist nation and we look to monetize everything that we come across. We look to monetize our beautiful outdoors with ecotourism. We look to monetize the way that we utilize public transportation and try to figure out how to create revenue for states and towns through rail, bus. We monetize the education system in our country. We monetize the alcohol and the medical prescription industry. So why would this be any different? I made a comment that rings true here just about 2 weeks ago when I was interviewed by a reporter from Vermont, and he said, while I know you're working on commercialization, Vermont started with, let's make it legal and home grow first, and then we move to commercialization. And I said, well, if you can brew beer in your backyard and you can make wine and you can make craft spirits, why can't you grow cannabis? So it's not really sort of a societal civil right, but it's sort of an evolving culture that we've come to. So that's where I'm at in terms of its legality and like sort of its time has come. More specifically, I think there are two active bills that I've been very supportive that have been driven by, I'll say, a disparate community. And I guess the example I'll use is for the last few weeks, as we looked at House Bill 1598, which is commercialization of cannabis through state-run cannabis stores, which for intents and purposes, while I voted for the bill, I'm not a big fan of the bill. And then House Bill 629, which is legalization and home grow. Groups supporting those efforts have been, and I've been part of some of the interesting conversations, are groups like the ACLU and Americans for Prosperity and the Marijuana Policy Project and New Hampshire CAN, which is a business industry organization. So you're basically putting left, right, libertarians, liberals, Republicans are all together on the same issue. Even a lot of the sort of the Liberty Alliance and that's in the House, who are, I probably disagree with about 90% of their policies, but there's one or two things, and this might be one where it's, the freedom to create this as an industry. And I think that's the biggest third part for me, is that, when we begin to look around at the challenges that we have in our country now, it comes from the states wanting to create services for our constituents and then trying to figure out how we pay for them. And you can be a big tax state or you can be a small tax state. We are a small tax state, no sales tax, no income tax, minimal capital gains tax, interest and dividend tax now gone away. So how do we create revenue for our schools, for our mental health care, for our infrastructure projects that align with our people? Where does new revenue come from? So we can't keep putting it on the back of property tax owners in the state, which has been the past. So we have to look for new forms of revenue. And I think this is one that, because of the other topics that I mentioned, that it can be used in a medicinal way, that it can be commercially well, logically sold and distributed. because it is something that's time has come that society is comfortable with. It's now something that we can approach as an industry. And I think if we're right now, we may get into this in your conversation, but I think part of what's important about this, Steve, is that it allows for local economic development. You know, if we can have growth facilities and dispensaries, that drives businesses to start in regions where they might not normally be. For example, the North Country, you know, a semi-generalization is folks that enjoy cannabis might be presumed to enjoy mountain biking, hiking, skiing, snowboarding. So if you can build grow facilities and dispensaries in those areas, those tourists are coming there. And you're now giving them another reason to come there. And if you don't build them, you're now giving those tourists a reason to go somewhere else, to go to Maine, to go to Vermont, to go to Western Mass, to go to upstate New York. So not only do they take their tourism dollar that they're going to spend on food, beverage, etc., that they would spend on cannabis, but they're also going to take their tourism dollar, their restaurants, their hotel stays, their park admittance fees, their gear that they might buy. So we have to look at it from an economic development point of view as well, all along making sure that in that policy, we are keeping in mind addictive revenue for healthcare, you know, whether it's tied to any of the folks that might have challenges with engaging it or might have challenges with entering into a community. You know, someone that may have addictions in the past would probably be someone that I would say, you know, you need to stay away from this, because if you have trouble with alcohol or gaming or, you know, other addictions, it's not necessarily the cannabis that's doing it. It's another whole psychological aspect. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to go that deep into it. But in essence, my support for it is that it is something that I think we've matured with. It's something that we understand where it can be of value financially, where it can be of value socially, where it can be of value medically, and it's a time to come. And I think the one other part that Kate mentioned is a huge aspect of the cannabis industry is now tied for me to sort of restorative justice, social justice, especially for the BIPOC community. You know, we, for the moment, say House Bill 1598 passes, we're going to go from a state where I say you can't, the government says you can't have it, and I'm going to put you in jail for it, to I'm the only one you can buy it from. That bothers me. We have spent so much time incarcerating people over something so minor that, you know, we have to be able to build infrastructure that allows them to take part in that. In the state of Vermont, they actually have a restorative justice program where they're working on technical assistance grants to give licensee applicants who are low income or have been marginalized, to give them an opportunity to get into the game. And how else are we going to help those who need help economically to grow in our country if we don't allow them to participate in projects like this? And Kate said it specifically. It has been a white male driven business. And I think if we're going to enter that into New Hampshire, you know, we have to factor that in. So I don't want to dig up my whole 10 minutes, but I want to sort of give the big picture of why I'm for it, where my logic comes from. You know, I've been working in this industry, and I say industry in the communications part and the marketing part for the last 5 or 6 years. So it's not like this is something new to me. It's something that I've been studying. So that's my point of view and where I come from in my pro-cannabis stance.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tim. And you brought up a lot of points that I think in the Q&A we'll touch upon. We are getting questions already from our audience tonight. So hold tight, continue bringing the questions in. I want to now flip it a little bit to another good friend from the legislature, Sue Mullen from Bedford. Sue will take a little bit different perspective, perhaps, from where Tim is. General opposition to legalization, though, as I think both Kate and Tim have noted, there is some nuance to what is pro and what is anti, and I think it's part of what is making it so challenging, even for when there appears to be perhaps a majority that on some broad level might favor some form of legalization. it's when you get into the details that it obviously gets very nuanced, complicated, and the principles Kate has mentioned come into play as they should. With all that said, Sue, you're on.
Thanks, Steve. So raise your hand if you know the phrase skunk at the lawn party. Does anybody know that phrase? Okay, that gives me an indication of where you are in terms of your age. The skunk at the lawn party is basically the, sort of little animal skirting along the edges that has a big impact on the quality of life, of the fun of the people at the lawn party. But if you don't notice the skunk is there, it's a problem. If you're the skunk, it's also a problem. So a couple things about me as a Democrat who opposes the legalization of marijuana. I'm 65 years old. That means that I was 13 when Woodstock took place. I was a music lover from the minute of my birth, and the person that I identify with the most from my youth is Joan Baez, which I'm sure that the New Hampshire Journal will have a field day with that piece of information when they get a hold of it. So for me, the legalization of marijuana or not is not a moral issue. I don't ascribe to the idea that, only hippies and drug addicts and aliens ascribe to legalizing marijuana. I certainly understand because I'm a little younger than Bill Clinton. So while he wasn't inhaling, I probably was. And I think my high school friends would find it quite amusing that I sit on a panel opposed to the legalization of marijuana. But as I grew up, I became a drug and alcohol counselor. And I did that for 27 years with middle school age children. So looking at the public safety aspect of marijuana usage on the adolescent brain is something that is near and dear to me. I also, because I was a community-based counselor, have worked tremendously closely with our police department, not arresting people for their usage of marijuana, but looking at the statistics that came out in Colorado and California and Oregon about automobile usage and the increase in accidents that happened in each of those states once marijuana had become legalized. So for me, the public health issues, the safety issues, the law, the financial issues, Tim alluded to the money-making aspect of legalizing marijuana, and certainly in a state that does not have an income tax or a sales tax, we're always looking for revenue. But marijuana is illegal federally, which puts us in an interesting quandary in terms of how we manage the revenue that is generated from the marijuana industry. It's a cash-only business, basically, and that in and of itself means that transparency and being able to follow the numbers becomes educated guesswork at best. So along those sort of four global categories, I would offer information from the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving, which can give you all kinds of statistics about what happened in terms of comorbidity and fatality on the roads once marijuana became legalized in, as I mentioned, Colorado and Oregon in particular. In Oregon right now, the legislature has appropriated $25 million to recently, this year, during this session, to study the illegal farming of marijuana in the state of Oregon where marijuana is legal. So there's been a renewed interest in this idea that the black market does not go away when a state legalizes marijuana. In fact, dispensaries have seen tremendous amounts of crime, including in the state of Maine, where it's been sort of widely broadcast that neighborhood dispensaries have taken a big criminal hit. And you know, the impact on law enforcement has also been tremendous. We need to be looking at our driving under the influence laws and how they apply to the legalization of pot. We need to be looking at what happens in a routine stop. Right now, law enforcement has a pretty clear beacon. When they pull somebody over and they smell alcohol, then they've got probable cause for everything that happens from that point forward. But we don't have measures of driving under the influence of cannabis. And you know, I think that's a problem. I think it's a problem because of the public safety aspect. I think it's a problem because of our understaffed law enforcement agencies. You know, you're talking about rural areas. I defer to my colleague in the North Country who knows a whole lot more about rural policing than I do in the greater Manchester area. But we have the chief of police joining with the New Hampshire Medical Society, the New Hampshire Nurses Association, the New Hampshire Public Health Office, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they're all pointing towards cognitive disorders, pregnancy risks, mental health challenges, the risks of smoking and vaping, highway safety, increased healthcare costs, all because we don't have any regulation. As Kate said, we have a choice in New Hampshire. Do I believe that you ought to be able to smoke pot at home if you choose to? Sure. We can get into a debate over the fact that I think that smoking anything is dangerous. And I would tell you right now that quitting smoking cigarettes in 1981 was the hardest thing I think I've had to do as an adult. So, you know, I think smoking anything is a problem. But when you look at the risk to public health and public safety, I think we need to be looking at what kinds of things can we put into position before we legalize. It seems to me that we are turning a blind eye on California, on Oregon, on Colorado, on all of the work. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity. Nova public television aired on April 13th. They aired a special called The Cannabis Question. And it was in conjunction with UCLA, the University of California at San Diego Autism Center, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, the University of California, McLean Hospital, Mount Sinai. All right, this was an august group of people who spent an hour talking about the difference between the pot that I smoked in 1972 and what is happening now in terms of the THC levels, the other 399 chemicals that you find in cannabis, the flooding of the market of CBD products, and the fact that gummies and bath salts and vapors and lotions and patches and whatever are coming onto the market with such speed that adequate research can't be done before these things have become, you know, part of mainstream America. So my chief concern, as I said, is public health and safety. It is the speed at which this is happening. It is the fact that I personally believe that we ought to be turning our eyes towards national legalization of cannabis, not a federalist state by state approach. Because if we turned our eye towards a national legalization, then we might actually have a fighting chance at establishing research that is peer reviewed and repeatable. We might have a fighting chance at law enforcement that feels that they have the man and woman power to be able to deal with what's going to happen on our roads. And we would have a fighting chance at being able to offer quality control on both things that are coming out under the umbrella of medical marijuana and also over-the-counter products that, you know, so many, I'm sure, I have arthritis in more places than I knew existed. So I'm a chronic pain sufferer myself. I'm sure that all of you know 10 people that are using CBD in some form, fashion, or another. I'm worried about the fact that people are putting things on themselves or in themselves without the science behind it. I have a Bachelor of Education in Science. I have a master's in science. That's my thing. And I think that what we're attempting to do in terms of recreational marijuana usage is shortchanging the public in terms of safety.
All right, Sue, powerful.
How's that?
Powerful case.
Okay.
That was strong. That was great. And we have a lot of talent, as you can already see on this panel tonight. And we've got a little bit more talent on deck next. Friend, State Representative, just put pressure on Manny, I think. Manny Espitia from Nashua, arguing on the same side generally that Tim is for the legalization. Tim, you got to follow Sue. Good luck with that, huh? She's strong. So, Tim, Manny, the floor is yours.
I love it. And, you know, Sue, I get it. I totally, and Kate, I want to just say, appreciate all the hard work that New Futures has been putting into this and making sure that we have, you know, cannabis that is, you know, not just going to flow through and, you know, be unregulated, which to me, honestly, regulation and like, you know, this is where Republicans will kill me, is because I believe in regulations. I believe strongly that we should have things regulated, just like we have a liquor commission and just like we have oversight over so much of this. So, you know, looking back, I will say for those of you who might be against 1598, y'all got some good news today, which is the fact that it was ITL'd, which means it will have a negative recommendation by 5-0, which so it did not have a good day today. And I will say, you know, I think this is definitely not the best. Not the preferred, like my personal preferred method, but as Sue and Tim and I and, you know, Kate also, Steve and Wendy all know, you know, the House is where you have to compromise on literally to get anything done, like, and anything done, whether it's like, you know, if I came up with the ideal for solving, you know, world hunger, people would say, oh, well, no, I disagree. And this is how we're going to try to edit this bill. So it tailor fits my way. But, you know, I think with I strongly support a lot of the issues we talked about with New Futures on making sure we have social justice, and I know that 1598 didn't, and making sure that we do have, you know, things of warnings. One of the amendments that was added was making sure that pregnant women would not be allowed, you know, would be told, don't, you know, you shouldn't be doing this. But, you know, and this goes to one of my further points, is like one of the issues that we have though is we can tell people all day what they should and should not do. We can tell pregnant women not to smoke, tell them not to drink. And arguably, you know, it's actually, you know, what was it? I'm like thinking of, like, lost my track, but like drinking during a pregnancy is one of the more harmful things you can do during a pregnancy, as it can lead to serious issues for after delivery for a child. But, you know, I think one of the big reasons I've been supportive of legalization of cannabis is, you know, the people, our constituents have been talking about it for so long. They've seen the sea that we're around of states like Vermont, of Maine, and Massachusetts having legalized it, having started to enter the retail market. I go to the Bahama Breeze in Nashua, which borders Tingsboro, and I can literally see people with New Hampshire plates going in, buying cannabis, and then coming back right to New Hampshire. This isn't an issue that we're really we are just watching other states really kind of reap the benefits of this. Any of the revenues that come from it, we're losing out on that. And no matter, we could ban alcohol in this state, people are going to go to other states and get it, unfortunately. And that's part of the problem, is that I would love to see a national solution on this. I would just like I would love to see a national solution on voting, for example. All of we should have a system of voting that actually works, and that's every state doesn't get to choose the way we do it, because what works in Idaho may not work in New Hampshire. But unfortunately, we don't have that system. So we are stuck with having to create our own systems and do it on a state-by-state model, which can work, but it also has downsides to it. So as we are trying to do this here, I think the national current is heading towards federal decriminalization of it, I think, and to legalization in the future. Obviously, we can't bank on that. We can't say, oh, let's just wait till it's fully legalized, because other states around us are already ahead of the curve. And it can only go so much further, where we're just going to have to keep waiting and waiting, because like I said, with 1598, we've already, because of where it is and the current status of the bill, we most likely will not be able to get this. So we have to wait another year for the House to reconvene. I do think that the next time we have a chance at this, that we actually have a better, when we start talking about retail, that we do have a better system, that we have a top-down system where we're able to provide folks with, folks who've actually been, who've been incarcerated around this, who have had their lives, that they would have a shot at this, that they would have some restorative justice in this. And I think that's happening right now in, I want to say New York or Massachusetts, where some of the first people to get permits are people who've been negatively affected by these laws. So, I want to be able to see that, I think expungements should be a part of the conversation. I think that we have had conversations about banning the box here in New Hampshire, and we've seen how that's affected folks who have been caught up in the opioid crisis and how they've been unable to find jobs. We shouldn't be, having a bad record should not be a determinant on how you're doing, how you move forward with your career. So I think expungements is something that needs to be on the table next time around, in the next session, hopefully, when we're talking about this. I think that like Sue was mentioning with the concern of public health and public safety, I think there has to be, I think we're going to get to legalization. I don't know if the governor will sign HB 629, that it has passed the Senate, which I think is the first time a cannabis bill has actually passed a Senate committee. So we'll see what happens on the House floor, the Senate floor tomorrow. But if it does pass, Governor Sununu will have a chance to say whether or not we should legalize. We had a couple of bills that made it to the governor in 2018, and unfortunately he vetoed them. So I think, and it's happened on both sides. We've had Senator, our former governor, now Senator Hassan, who's also vetoed these bills. So this is an issue that it's been also a bipartisan anti-cannabis. So we're hoping that with just the legalization, we have a chance to stop putting people in jail for this. I mean, we've already started that with the part where we are decriminalized it, but we still have ways to go. I think of, like I said, another big part of this is just the fact that constituents have been, this is incredibly popular here in New Hampshire, and just across the country. This is something that is, I believe that like 66% of people supported it being sold out of the liquor stores. So, just the idea that people support it being sold out of liquor stores, and a much higher rate of people who support it just being, legal in general, shows that the public is in favor of this. I don't particularly, it's not something that I'm like, oh, I'm doing this for personal gain. I'm not trying to start my own dispensary. I rarely don't smoke. And, there are definitely issues, like I said, and Sue, you pointed out something. This is no longer, this isn't your mom or your granddad's pot. That's true. And this is why we need regulation. It's why, if we are, when we have something that's not legal, we aren't able to regulate it as well. We're not able to say, okay, it's just a complete, oh, this is banned. And because of that, people are then going off and finding it in their own ways, unfortunately. And I'll end with saying, we are, I think when people come to us and talk about gateway up, or like, this is being a gateway drug, I have family that struggle with other sources of addiction. I have family that, and they will find their way, unfortunately, they'll find their gateway, whether that is gambling, whether that is alcohol, and other things. So it is, people find what drives them, unfortunately, and that is why we have to do a better job with prevention across the state. And we have, and obviously, we can't just prohibit because people will find their way, but I think we need to make sure that our youth are safe, and that our youth don't get their hands on it, and that we're providing, good, some good funding for organizations to be able to tell people about, why they shouldn't be going down this path. So no, I appreciate what everyone's had to say so far, and I'm hoping that, get some good results on 629.
Okay, thank you, Manny. Got a lot of questions and some comments. Actually, there's been some good questions and answers in the questions. People are deciding they're not going to wait for us. They're just going to go at it between the participants. So that's kind of fun to watch. But I wanted to try to distill a handful of the questions into a couple of broad queries for the group. Kate laid out at the outset a quartet of principles that if anything goes forward, any form of legalization goes forward, that they should have these core principles. And for the most part, most legislators that I've heard across the aisle, as you've mentioned, it's bipartisan, both support and opposition, are in general agreement with many, if not all, of those principles. So it doesn't seem like there are advocates, strong advocates for all four of them in different parts of the 400-member legislature. I'm going to focus on the House mainly here. That said, regardless of whether or not you support or oppose legalization at the moment, I think a lot of folks in the public go 70% plus of people polling, like Manny said, support some form of legalization. It seems like a majority of the House on some very broad level support it in theory, but then you get into the details and it gets a lot harder. And this maybe goes to the legislators first, regardless of what you may personally feel, what appears to be the primary impediments to reach consensus in a majority kind of way for any of these bills so far? There's a ton of bills, and they all seem to have trouble getting to some kind of consensus to move it forward. How does that match up with the principles that Kate laid out? Where are the sticking points where people are just saying these bills are not meeting what New Hampshire needs in order to move this forward?
I'm willing to be the guinea pig, Steve. You want me to go first?
Sure.
Well, I think two things. One, taxes, right? New Hampshire does not like taxes. So in most states, it's a revenue generator because, say, for example, you go to California, you pay a sales tax, you pay a cannabis tax, And then when I went into a dispensary to purchase some, and I use it, and I use it legally, and there was actually a town of Palm Springs tax. So there were of taxes on the sale of the product, right? So that's something that really is the wedge here in New Hampshire. If we want to find new revenue, how are we going to do it? The model that was proposed with it being run by the state was that the state would then generate the new revenue, whether they're generating the business profit or business enterprise taxes, like they're running the liquor commission, they're generating the revenue. So we didn't have to tax a third party business, didn't have to tax a consumer, and then send the tax revenue to the DOR for the state to get it. That was the business model that they thought, let's do that. I have a lot of problems, like I said, with Manny, does. I have a lot of problem with that business model because now it's a vertical monopoly for the state. They grow it, they package it, they sell it, they test it, they license it, they regulate those businesses above in the list above. So that's the problem, is how do we run it as a business to put all these controls in that I think is important to folks like New Futures. How do we, and I mentioned before, I've been in this working in this industry for the last 5 or 6 years. I've been working with a group called the Cannabis Certification Council. They are the preeminent organization, I'll call them the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval on sustainability of growing. So clean growing, organic growing, no chemicals, no heavy metals, sustainability in water usage and energy uses, sustainability in packaging, because you want to safeguard children, you have to have multiple layers of packaging, but you also want to be sustainable. You don't want to create a lot of waste and stick it in the landfill. Another big problem that we have in our state, solid waste. So do you then create a product at private dispensaries that charges you a rooms and meals tax type fee? So the big sticking point in the legislature is, how do we accept this industry as an industry to create jobs, create economic development, to create revenue? And I think when you can regulate it, when you can bring it above the table instead of working below the table, you can test it better, you can control its potency, you can have folks checking licenses on people that are going to buy it, so you can keep it out of the hands of folks that are under 21, and you can create some more regulation in it. But we have to be willing to create a cannabis control commission and regulate dispensaries like every other of the 19 states around the country that have it legal. We did not want to do that. So it's a money thing. It's a money thing. It's a money thing. For all the good that the revenue can bring in the state of New Hampshire, revenue is not just entered into lightly. We're very persnickety. So that's one of the big issues for me that I think is a sticking point on how we're going to approach it and how we have been approaching it in the House.
So the revenue side is one. I mean, there is, you got some that favor legalization, but are very uncomfortable with the state playing a central role in the monetization. You have some that don't want any tax revenue from it, that are generally anti-tax, but have more of a libertarian bent, kind of, legalize it, but I don't want any money. And you have others who sound like a lot more passionate about revenue coming out of it as one of the primary arguments for being for it in the near term. And clearly, if that's the case, those are folks that are not going to see eye to eye on probably just about any bill, irrespective of all the other important issues you've all brought up for and against. So there's the money part. Sue.
So yes, and I think I think what Tim's alluding to is also a symptom of a larger problem. It's a philosophical problem, and it has to do with this idea of no tax on anything. I will not compromise. I will not talk about it. If you even mention it, it's dead. No regulation on quality control. I don't believe in regulation. I think it's government overreach. If you even talk about it, it's dead. So, as somebody I'm a native New Hampshire resident, my parents were born here as well. I get a little chafed when people want to tell me what it feels like to live free or die. I feel it a little bit around my collar, because somewhere along the line, people got the idea that live free or die meant a totally hedonistic lifestyle where I don't have to worry about my community, my neighbor. I only have to worry about myself and what's in front of me. And I am unwilling to compromise because it's my way or the highway. That is not the New Hampshire way. The New Hampshire way is we take care of each other. You do in your yard what you choose to do. I do in my yard what I choose to do. I don't pass judgment on you. You don't pass judgment on me. But when it comes to things like kids and old people and roads and highways, we pull together and we do what we have to do for the sense of community. That has been lost. And the legalization of marijuana is just a symptom of a much bigger problem that we have, because if we have lost the ability to compromise, good luck to us. Good luck.
On the revenue issue, there were 2 or 3 different questions from the audience tonight around the following. Whether it was like this. Yeah, I generally favor legalization, and whether it's a retail model or the state model that recently is looks like it's getting the thumbs down. The amount of revenue that will be generated from any one of these models will probably be declining, in part because of competition from neighboring states as well as Canada. That you have to keep the price fairly low, or else the black market, which you're hoping to kind of get out, right, will then be back in the game if you overprice the legal product. Basically, there are a number of factors, and that if we overestimate how much revenue will come in, a lot of people are going to be really disappointed. And as Kate noted at the outset, it's not like New Hampshire's ever done a good job on the issue of following through on promises over the last 20 years on money that's supposed to be coming from alcohol sales, for example. Why should we believe that it's going to be any better in the same culture with a different product? So what would you say to this argument of kind of the declining revenue market, and that we should be careful not to overestimate, in a best case scenario, how much revenue is likely to come from a legalization regime?
I'll just weigh in a little bit. I think it's unpredictable at this point. I think that there's been a lot of different estimates. There was a marijuana legalization study committee a few years ago that estimated a certain amount. Off the top of my head, I can't think of what it is, but that also was, a few years ago now. The states around us have legalized. I do think what was brought up earlier is that there really has to be that sweet spot. Otherwise, the black market will, continue to undercut. There are states that are still struggling with that. And then at the end of the day, everybody has a laundry list of where they want that revenue to go. And even if it says very clearly it should go to substance abuse prevention, treatment, and recovery, the legislature can always override that. So, you could have all the revenue in the world and there's not really a guarantee it'll go where it's supposed to. But I do think it's very unpredictable at this point, just because of the factors that we talked about with, being a little bit behind the states around us and balancing the price point with, trying to be compete with still an illegal market.
We have also gotten a couple of questions, and I think a few of you alluded to this in your initial remarks about enforcement and some of the challenges, technological and otherwise, relative to identifying driving under the influence, for example, with alcohol, compared to a similar type of enforcement with cannabis. Another question, I'm trying to lop a few different questions into the same broad one. Also one that got in, can you talk about how you think that different forms of potential legalization may or may not help the underage use of cannabis, which as somebody who has kids, one is a freshman, just finished freshman year of college, another's in the middle of high school at a public high school. It is stunning to me how much of it is around for people that would be clearly they would be underage even in a legal regime. I mean, they're under 18, and it is concerning as a parent, to be honest. Are there any things with the legalization bills that have come through that might help us at the same time to deal with underage use?
Well, Steve, I'll
sorry.
Oh, no,
Well,
Tim, go
Sue,
ahead.
well, I'll take one part because I think I can't take this whole chunk on, and I don't want to also monopolize it. But I do want to talk about you talked about the testing. I think the biggest problem that the world of cannabis has is with the alcohol industry. There's a lot of funding for NHTSA, for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, to do testing for under the influence. Right. And we should have that. We should have that for anything. We should actually have it if you're getting a prescription for Percocets. We should have it for folks that are over 75 wearing glasses. I mean, so I'm really, it's an important thing. And I think the fact that cannabis is on Schedule 1 federally does not allow for any federal funding to go to healthcare institutions, educational institutions, research institutions that could help us solve some of these problems so that we do have some control. Because law enforcement officers, especially up here in the North Country, came to me and said, cannabis isn't the industry, it isn't the issue. It's for me, it's meth or heroin or those type of things. But also I don't have any way to police them. It's hard. You talked about, I think Sue mentioned this, right? You can open a window and you can smell if someone's drinking. You can smell if someone's using it. But how much of that is a percentage of impairment is based on your body type. So the feds are sort of hamstringing the opportunity to solve some of these problems for law enforcement because we can't put any of that federal funding into research. So that was a little part of your question that I wanted to answer. I would very much defer to other parts to Sue.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Tim more. I mean, that whole idea of needing to legitimize research is huge. The other thing is too, when we're talking about young people, we have to look at sort of the different times on the fork. The medical use of marijuana has been exceptionally successful, and it has been successful for PTSD, epilepsy, chemo, neuropathy, chronic pain, anxiety, sleep disorders. These are things that kids' family members are experiencing. So if you're 15, 16 years old and you're at home and your grandparents can't sleep and they use CBD and all of a sudden it's a miracle drug, that does not deliver the message to you as an adolescent that you need to beware that product. So I think that on the one hand, we need to look at the, the positive aspects of the medical use of marijuana. And on the other hand, we need a very robust public education campaign on the dangers of using a substance on a body that is not fully developed. We did it with tobacco usage. We did it with the black lung videos, and not that we don't have kids that smoke. Of course we do. We have adults who have, Mensa IQs that smoke. So we don't expect that we're going to eliminate it all. But I think that the idea of the impact of marijuana on a pregnancy, the impact of marijuana on a developing adolescent brain. I mean, there are quantities of information out there about the impact on gray matter and white matter, and memory usage, behavior disorders. So I think public education has to be huge because we don't want to see one size fits all. We want to see, if you're 21 years of age or older, then you get a choice because your body is mature. But if you're under that age, then we want you to know what all the risk factors are, because they could in fact impact you for a very long time.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Sue said too. I mean, what we're talking about is that perception of harm for kids. And we've seen in New Hampshire and, everywhere, is that we're making a lot of progress when it comes to reducing youth use of alcohol and prescription drugs. but marijuana and vaping, and that's just going
Right.
up and up and up. And a lot of it has to do with the perception of harm. More parents are using it, they're hearing more about it. Vaping, we know that the tobacco industry just moved in to have vaping, seem like it's nothing to worry about, and now our rates are gone up. And so what you do have is just more youth using it. And that is absolutely the case with states that have commercialized, and even states that haven't, is that the perception of harm is so low. Anytime it's low, you will see the increase in use of a drug. And that's exactly what's happening with marijuana.
We also received a few questions pushing back on the pending failure of the state-run model, and asking questions about, paraphrasing to combine several. Hey, wait a second. We've been doing this with liquor on the side of the highway and a lot of other places around the state for generations now, several generations. This would seem like a way to control the substance and maybe require that where we get the product is locally grown. There would be a lot of ability to check a lot of boxes that are seem to be concerns across the spectrum, including assurance of quality, being able to control who sells it, perhaps being able to maximize revenue or at least streamline it. We had one person say something to the effect of the bureaucratic element already exists with the Liquor Commission. Could you more or less integrate it or copycat it? That would seem like a pretty efficient idea. You get the idea. So there are several folks going, maybe there are some good arguments that I'm not aware of, but how come this sort of state-run, largely mimicking the Liquor Commission model, at the risk of oversimplifying it, how come this isn't more popular, and how come this isn't apparently going to go anywhere this year?
Go ahead, Kate. I was going to say, you look anxious. You look like you're ready to go for it.
I mean, I think anybody could really answer it. I mean, I'm less concerned of like the model, I mean, a lot of what you're hearing about is this people not liking the state having control over it because the ATCs want that industry. That's why they moved to New Hampshire. They want that industry. So, a lot of the people who are saying it can't work that way are saying it because they want to have the business themselves. But at the end of the day, I think you have just as many concerns. I mean, yes, since Prohibition, the Liquor Commission has been regulating alcohol. They can regulate it. Do they have very little? Do I have a lot of faith that they control the marketing so it doesn't appeal to kids? No, I don't, based on the products they have. But I don't have that faith with the ATCs who publicly have that, ads on their Instagram targeting kids. So I think whoever has the model, you have to be sure that those principles are embedded in it and not just say, oh, it's not a good model because I don't have the business. I want the business.
I support retail. I mean, on the small businesses, but I'm also good with the idea of the state running the show. I know that everyone will tell me, oh, it's a vertical thing, and I get it, but I also think that it goes back to regulation. It goes back to being able to go and control it a little bit more. I also think it's, it is one where we have already seen it be successful with alcohol, but I think one of the issues that I heard a lot was that it's tougher to do it because of how the feds are going to look at it, and it's why we get into really complex and tricky areas, why we can't duplicate it as well as we can. But I think one of the I think it goes back to some people were asking us why are the Free Staters for this if they are against government, and that just goes to show where this is. I mean, you have one of the leaders of this group, like Jason Osborne, who is the majority leader on this bill and who is in favor of having it being run by the state. So I think it's Americans for Prosperity and the ACLU coming together is like weird to me. I think we've seen how, and this, if you want to see strange bedfellows, you should just take a trip to Concord and go to the State House, because you'll find them wherever you like, on not just this issue, but on a lot of other issues. But I mean, I'm talking about bail reform right now. But I think with this, like, I think this is truly one that is bipartisan and nonpartisan. It's like, there are people on both sides who are for it and who are against it. And at the end of the day, I think most people just want to see people and hope they're safe while they're doing this. So
let me ask you guys, and we only have a few minutes before we begin to close the event. And again, appreciate everybody's time and interest. Both on the positive learning and the cautionary tales. Obviously, a number of states around the country have legalized. Canada has legalized, and all of our neighbors have legalized in various forms. What are some of the positive lessons that, luckily, by being able to watch others go through, there are positive lessons that we've learned? And what are some of the negative lessons that we've learned that we really would want to avoid if we ever get to that place? So both the positive and negative side of the lessons learned.
Oh, that's a big question, Steve.
It is. You can pick one.
While Tim's thinking, I'll just jump in with
Sure.
the one
Thank
thing
you.
that we've seen is that the major concern, I think, that that states that are just recently commercialized, that they've taken from states that had commercialized years ago, is controlling the potency rate. I mean, as has been said a few times, this is not the marijuana from 30 years ago. There are products on shelves of 99% THC in states. There's waxes, concentrates, all of these things. And it's just very concerning. So you are seeing some states more recently who are saying, again, if we're going to regulate it like alcohol, and we have limits with beer and wine and spirits, why wouldn't we do the same thing with marijuana? And I will say the industry has fought that tooth and nail. They did not want to have potency limits. So that is a good thing we're seeing, is some of the states more recently are taking that notice to that and putting in some public health policies around that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll follow up on what Kate said. In Colorado and Washington, they're actually revisiting the potency allowances initially. Again, this through the Certification Council. I've learned some of this. I'm on their ESGR, social governance. So what I think, maybe this goes back to 3 questions ago, Steve, like what we should have been learning is from the other 18 states, how they're doing it, so that we can put in these safeguards, we can put in these controls. Like I said at the top of this call, I think I talked with Kate and some of the folks from New Futures early on in this process, and their 4 pillars I thought were great. I said, yeah, let's try and build a bill that follows that. That got completely off the rails. And that's why we're gonna have a bill that a lot of people who want to support, like Manny and I, don't like. So I think looking at what are the best practices that we can learn, about safety and growing, safety and potency, logical creation in terms of sustainability in energy use and manufacturing and packaging. I think, understanding sort of a big component for me, which I didn't talk about at the beginning and I should have, is education. If you're going to create new revenue and we're going to say, hey, okay, we're going to profit from some of this, but like we've done with liquor and like we've done with casino, with lottery, and we've done with sportsbook, we've portioned some of the proceeds to go towards education. Here, education should be more targeted towards, education for young people about, what is advertising and advertising around this product, and which we don't touch manipulative advertising in our country at all. We're scared of it. Those are important things that could be brought into the equation that we've learned from some of the other states that are have done this well. A lot of people in New Hampshire knock Massachusetts and they go, Massachusetts, the nanny state. But they've put in logical safeguards to the point where they've actually created a new fund to go back to be able to financially support restorative justice or BIPOC licensee applicants, because they basically said, hey, we're gonna give you a portion of the licenses. And then they really didn't realize that like those folks don't have access to capital. They don't have well-heeled friends. They don't have groups of investors. So they basically said, if we actually want to follow through in what we're doing, we're gonna have to take a portion of the proceeds and put it into a fund to give those folks that are lower income a chance to succeed in this business. Those are the kind of things that we have to put forward here. And so we have to try harder to make a bill that works. I think this current bill was a quick of, well, a couple comments to me, well, this is the kind of bill that the governor would support. I mean, if that's what we're driving the bill based on, then that's not really that great. So.
All right, I'm looking at the clock, and part of my job is to keep us more or less on task. So we'll start with Kate on this. We'll go Kate, Tim, Sue, and Manny, which I believe is how we opened. But if you want to take maybe up to 2 minutes, though you don't have to, kind of summarize any kind of key takeaway that if there was from your initial remarks and maybe subsequent thoughts during the course of the last 90 minutes, if there's a takeaway point or two from your perspective that you'd like folks that are watching this to take away from this evening, what would they be? And I want to thank you in advance for taking all this time this evening in a very thoughtful way to hopefully educate all of us on the topic. So Kate, if you don't mind starting, a key takeaway point or two you'd like to make sure you impress upon folks tonight.
I think that there is, like I said, a sweet spot. I think we can find middle ground. You mentioned earlier, Steve, that everybody agrees to those principles. If that was the case, then we would see bills like that, and we haven't. The last bill before this one, the Cannabis Commission was completely the marijuana industry. And if you had ever opposed marijuana legalization, you couldn't serve on that commission. So, we have had bills drafted that hasn't touched the principles. So if we are really serious about it, let's finally do it. Let's not just point fingers and say, well, you don't agree with me, so I'm not going to talk to you about this. So I do think that's the first point. I think, in a lot of ways, we're all, in agreement on a lot of things. So we have to decide as residents of New Hampshire what we want to look at, what we want commercialization in this state to look like. And we do not want the industry to drive it. And that's been part of the problem. So, a lot of these bills, like when we talk about potency limits, when we talk about, advertising limitations, all of that, is not included because some very, marijuana policy project and the industry has absolutely said, no, we're not doing that. So I think we can all get there. It's just a matter of really considering what's the most important thing for our state and not being worried about what's the most important thing for an industry.
All right. Thank you very much, Kate. Tim, same opportunity for you.
So we love to throw around this phrase about freedom in the state, right? But we all know that freedom has a price. Our veterans and our folks that we've lost in wars have paid that price for freedom. We financially have to pay that price for freedom. If we want something, we have to have certain give ups. My issue with some of the folks driving this, maybe unfairly or unfairly, the free staters are the price of freedom. They want freedom, but they want everybody else to pay for it. The reason why I use that as my analogy for this issue is we all have to have something that we want to give, and we all have to have something that we want to get. And there has to be consensus. And that's how you get a bill that's successful. And, if we're able to say, we are going to follow some of these policies of the new future, we're going to be able to figure out how we create an economic advantage for folks that normally don't get to participate in a business venture like this. We are going to be able to take percentages of that revenue and put it back in education and healthcare, and not just education around the issue of cannabis use, but also our education funding. Like, one of the biggest financial problems we have in this state, mental health care. Let's use the money and earmark it certain ways. so that you don't just say, hey, the state's going to get $100 million in the first year it sells cannabis. It's going to be, sure, we get $100 million and 20 of it's going to go here and 20 of it's going to go. And I guarantee you people will say, where do I sign up to support this bill? Because now you're smartly doing it. And as well, engage law enforcement community so that we know we have safe controls over, operating under the influence. So I think it's time for a cannabis commission, and not just we love to throw around study bills, and they're like, it's where bills, in my opinion, that's where bills go to die. Oh, let's put it in committee and to study. No one ever hears from it again. We need a commission to be able to bring the industry together, education, healthcare, and say, what is the right way to do this for our state so that we benefit, not just financially benefit, that we socially benefit, that we societally benefit.
All right. Thank you, Tim. Sue.
So for me, it's all about the science. So my questions have to do with public health and safety. We have watched other states legalize marijuana, and then we have seen the pitfalls and the successes. My question would be, why would we want to legalize marijuana without putting the guardrails up first? If we know what the pitfalls are, why are we not, we wouldn't put a kid on a bike without training wheels. We wouldn't put a kid in the car without making sure that they had instruction on how to appropriately use it. Why would we legalize something without putting up the guardrails that protect public health and safety? If we can do that, then the business model, to me, business is not my thing. I'm interested, but I am far from an expert. But I think that anyone would agree with a decent business model if the public health and safety were the leading issue.
Okay. And Manny.
So, like I said, our constituents say this is one of the most popular things, and it's usually in a time where things are so divided, where people are taking, we believe it's either be one-sided or the other. This is one where we actually see a pretty large number of over 70% of people who are supportive of this policy. I think it's a time where we should be taking it where, Tim was talking about the lack of revenues. We don't want to use the T word, but it's one of the issues that we have here is we're trying to fully fund our schools. We're trying to make sure our roads are fixed. We're trying to make sure we have mental health services covered. We just don't have enough money, and where are we going to get it from? And so, we can continue to wait around. Not wait. We can continue to work towards this. But the problem is, like I said, we're an island surrounded by other states that are already taking part of this. Our residents are taking part of this, whether we like it or not. It is already happening. So we can either find a way to do this safely, and really make sure that all folks can really kind of prosper off of this, or we can not, and that's, or we can continue to have the status quo, which is not serving us well either, because unfortunately, like I said, people are using in the state, and it's and we can just see other states getting the benefits of it, unfortunately.
All right, thank you, Manny. Thank you all, Kate, Sue, Manny, Tim. Thanks for taking 90 minutes on a weeknight. That is never an easy give. I don't care where you are in life. All right. You could be doing a lot of things with your time, and instead you're spending it helping engage the public. And hopefully we're all a little bit smarter from it. I want to thank the Hillsborough County Democratic Committee and Shana and Katie. Thank you for your leadership. Thanks for taking the initiative to put this together. I applaud Sue's applause because it's right on the mark. It's always a pleasure to spend time with love going anywhere in New Hampshire to talk Democratic politics. But I have to say I'm a little biased. I love the Hillsborough County Democrats, a lot of good friends. And hopefully as we go into the spring and summer into election season, we'll have lots of excuses to get outdoors together, have some fellowship, work together, and educate each other in a respectful way, like I think tonight was, and have a ton of respect for all of you on the call, as I do for Wendy. Wendy, I love you. It's great to see you this evening. Thanks for your participation, and let me send it to you to finish us out this evening.
Thank you, Steve. This has been a really, really good and balanced discussion on this topic. We've heard some really good information regarding the pros and cons around the possible legalization of cannabis in New Hampshire. I'd like to thank Steve for his moderation, and thanks also go to our panelists, Sue, Kate, Tim, and Manny, for sharing your views with us. And thank you to everyone who has attended this event. It is only through education and understanding that we can make informed decisions going forward. Well, that's it for this session. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Good
Thank
night,
you,
everyone.
Wendy. Thank you